glad to have the opportunity to speak with y'all today. I'm a little obsessive compulsive about roses, I guess. I enjoy talking to people about roses. And what I want to try to do today is to perhaps impart a little knowledge to you on some roses that you're maybe not too familiar with, and make you familiar with the Chambersville Tree Farms over in McKinney, Texas, or actually Salina, but it's real close to McKinney. I kind of call it the best kept secret in Texas of the fabulous rose garden we've got over there. The little history, first of all, on the Chambersville Tree Farms. It's actually a working tree farm. The main business is the sale of trees. Trying to specify, started out originally with a lot of Japanese maples and kind of specimen trees, but it expanded into more of the standard trees as they got more and more into the furnishing to the landscape industry and whatnot. But Dean's wife, Carol, is a longtime rosarian. She loved roses. She got Dean into roses years ago, and I actually met them through a Rose Society in Dallas. He asked me to come up, and they were interested in planting a few roses, and 1,000 roses later, we'll show you what developed from all of that. The gardens at Chambersville actually are comprised of a number of different gardens. And the name Chambersville comes from the little community of Chambersville, which is about 10 miles north of McKinney, Texas. McKinney, if you're not familiar, is about 30 miles north of Dallas. We live on the north side of Dallas. It's about a 30-minute drive from our house up there. The only really remaining thing in the little community of Chambersville is this United Methodist Church that has been there for a long time. It was rebuilt back in the 50s. The building you see now, there was a church there before then that is a remnant of that original community. There's a little cemetery there. There's about, I think, 700 or 800 people buried in that cemetery. And the cemetery is actually a Texas historical landmark. It was established by a family that moved there in 1847. They had an infant son that died in 1853, and they buried the son on this spot, and they donated the land, which became this little cemetery. This little town of Chambersville at one time was a thriving metropolis. It actually had 2 general stores. It had a cotton gin. It had a post office. It had a school. It was a thriving community. Another community down the road 10 miles, McKinney, was also a thriving little community. McKinney survived and is now a population of probably 500,000 people, and Chambersville only has that little church left. But that's kind of the history of it. This is a Google map of the Chambersville Tree Farm to kind of orient you a little bit. This is the little church. This is that little cemetery. Dean Oswald's property is basically down through, this is the East Fork of the Trinity River back over here. This is basically his property line around there. This is the working tree farm inventory. This is a few years old, but it's expanded now. This is all trees out in here. And then there's some garden areas in there that we developed over the years. The land actually came with roses. This is a shot of a tree on the property there. If you look closely, you see some little pink roses popping through up here, and you can see a few down here. That's Rosa satigera, the so-called prairie rose, a more common name. And it is very well adapted all through this part of the country. You can probably find it over here in Louisiana. It goes on up pretty far up in the United States. It is a rose that actually is of extreme significance right now. Dr. David Byrne down at Texas A&M University, who is the Basie Rose Chair, down there, and a rose geneticist. He has determined that Rosa sativa appears to be extremely resistant to rosette disease, which is a serious problem we have in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Praise the Lord, y'all don't have it over here yet. But, and we hope that you never do, because it is destroying roses in Dallas. But it appears that the Rosa sativa, if not resistant to rosette disease, is at least extremely tolerant. And so he is actually doing hybridizing at this point to try to develop new races of roses based on the genetics from Rosa sativa, hoping to breed roses that will be immune to rosette disease in the future. I keep laughing at Dave and saying, hey, that ain't going to happen in my lifetime. I'm looking for the magic bullet that'll cure it right now. But at least there's some hope for the future. So it's kind of interesting that with this huge problem we got, we may have the answer growing naturally on our problem. This is a close-up of a bloom of Rosa sativa. It's a once-blooming species rose. And if you drive the back roads around that part of Collin County, around the 1st of June, you'll see this little pink flower all over the place, in fence lines and naturalized all through the community there. Back to the garden. The first garden we put in was the Shakersville Heritage Rose Garden, and then eventually some other gardens. This first garden was built to kind of comply with some ideas that the Heritage Rose Foundation had for a national garden scheme. If you're familiar, in England they have a garden scheme, and they have rose gardens around the country that are designated as these rose scheme gardens that display plants that do well in that particular area. Of course, England's basically all the same region. The concept in the United States was to have gardens that grew roses that were very well acclimated to that particular climate and environment. So we put in this garden basically roses that we thought were going to be very well acclimated to our area, not realizing that our microclimate up here is a little colder than it is down in Dallas. We'll talk about that later. So anyway, it's a collection of basically tea roses, chinas, hybrid musk, and a few other varieties that are classes of roses that we feel are very well adapted to our area and typically are. The second area that was developed is the legacy of Legends Garden over here, the Pioneer Rose Garden, and eventually the Embellish Garden. We kind of look at each of those a little bit more specifically. This is the Heritage Rose Garden, the first garden we built. This area in here is all the Texas Found roses. If you're familiar with the Texas Rose Rustlers, they were a group of people that started with some people from Dallas and from the Houston area back in the late 70s, where they really, during the resurgence of the heritage roses, or antique roses, whatever you want, terminology you want to use for them. But basically, the old roses that were hybridized back in the 1800s, maybe early 1900s, roses that are very healthy, disease resistant, very hardy. We know this because we found these roses in cemeteries, at abandoned home sites, roses that were growing out in the elements. They didn't get watered unless it rained. They didn't get fertilized unless a cow was munching around close to them. And they just survived on their own. And they started finding these roses out in the country. Mike Shoup, who at the Antique Rose Emporium down in Brenham, Texas, they started taking the cuttings to Mike, and he got very interested in this. He was a very anti-rose nurseryman originally, and he said, my gosh, here are roses that are growing with no care whatsoever. His famous statement as far as finding roses in the cemetery, he says, my God, if dead people can grow them, anybody can grow them. So he got very interested in it. And that's kind of the beginning of the the Heritage Rose thing. It was happening on the West Coast and happening on the East Coast also kind of simultaneously in that time period. But these roses in here are a lot of the roses that were found by those Texas rose rustlers back then. At that point in time, many of them were found that didn't know what the name of them was. Some of them we still don't know what the name was. But many of them now do carry the correct name. They've been identified over the years and are now identified as roses that are in commerce today under their proper names. The second area is an area of Bermuda roses, the so-called Bermuda mystery roses. These are roses that are found on the island of Bermuda. Nobody really knows how they got there, but they find these roses. They are typically roses of the early 1800 time period. The best guess is that they were actually the loot of pirates. At that time, there was a large rose commerce between France and England and the New World, bringing rose plants into the United States that became very popular in this country. And they think that actually those roses that ended up in Bermuda were ships that were raided by pirates, and the roses were taken as part of the loot back to the island. There's no substantiation if they think that. Anyway, that's what that garden is, are those roses. This garden is China roses. And this, at the time this map was changed, this was all tea roses, planted on huge centers, because tea roses can get very, very big. This was hybrid musk roses down in this area, some noisettes. This was an assortment of hybrid China roses. These were the first cross China roses. When I say China rose, I'm talking about roses that the genetics are based upon roses that were discovered in China. In the late 1700s, they were brought into France. The historic story of Josephine during one of the many wars between France and England, she actually had a truce declared to let a ship come in through the English blockade from China because it had some of her roses for Malmaison. And the British actually let that ship pass through the blockade to get her roses there. So that's kind of the significance that roses played back in that time. But the genetics of those roses is where we get our true red color in roses, the bright red. There weren't any bright red. It's also where we got a more important characteristic, and that is it rebloomed. The roses from China had this, the French call it remontance, the ability to rebloom over and over again. So that was quite a sensation at that time. You can imagine all of a sudden they had roses that would rebloom instead of the once-a-year thing that they had. So that's what those roses are. The hybrid Chinas are the first cross, the laws of genetics, when you cross a once-blooming plant with a reblooming plant, which is what they started doing, was crossing them with all the old European roses. The first generation of plants is also once-blooming. The remontant gene is very recessive. It takes multiple crosses, future generations, for that gene to start surfacing, and you start getting reblooming. So this was some once-blooming China roses. And these are just a few shots of the garden. This was a hedge of metabolus. This area back in here was the found roses. These are some of the Bermuda mystery roses. That big thing there is Smith's Parish, red Smith's Parish, which is probably one of the most healthy roses that we've ever grown. Unfortunately, not healthy as far as resisting rose rosette. This is some of the Bermuda found roses in here. This is a gazebo. Back here is a wedding site where we now have 3 wedding sites on the property at Chambersville. It's become a major portion of Dean's business up there. Weddings, planning on 100 weddings next year on the property. This was the tea garden that I was talking about. Big tea roses planted on large centers. We've had some difficulty with the teas because of our colder than expected climate. And we get a lot of dieback on the teas every year, so they're not getting as big as we anticipated. Certain varieties will, but not all varieties respond the same. The second garden that was built is the Legacy of Legends garden. That white thing you see there is a tent. That's the first actually enclosed facility that we had. We still have our annual event we call Rose Dango or Bloom Dango, and possibly another name change this year. And it's surrounded by some gardens around the tent there. And that garden we call the Legacy of Legends, based on the fact that it has collections of roses of some of the famous rose hybridizers, particularly some of the American hybridizers. It started out majorly on Dr. Griffith Butt. He was a horticulturist at Iowa State University. He developed a large group of very disease-resistant, very hardy roses, more or less by necessity instead of by choice, because Iowa State gave him a chunk of land in the corner of a cornfield, which was their main interest, of course, was new varieties of corn and whatnot. But they gave him a little corner of their cornfield for him to grow his roses. But he had no budget for irrigation, he had no budget for fertilization, he had no budget for a crew to come in and prune them or anything. So basically he hybridized roses, stuck them in the ground, walked off and left them and saw what happened to them. And of course the laws of nature and the survival of the fittest, the good roses survived, but under those conditions. The bad roses didn't. We don't know what they are. They're gone, long gone. But those roses that survived became very popular with the advent of the healthy, disease-resistant rose trend. He has about 90 roses that are still known and still in commerce, and we have the largest collection of them on the property there at Chambersville. And these are some of the pictures. Those are actually, I believe, some drift roses in that photo. We've got a collection of Ralph Moore roses there. The next garden that was built is this little garden up here that we call the Pioneer Rose Garden. It's given that name, first of all, because there's some old farm equipment up there that Dean put on the property when he bought it many years ago. And Mike Shoup at the Antique Rose Emporium, his own hybridized roses, he calls them Pioneer roses. That's the name that he has given to his collection of roses. And so this is a collection of Mike Shoup's Pioneer roses that's planted up there. There's some of the old combine and some of the farm equipment up there that are in this rose garden. The thing we're going to talk about the most today, and that has become my passion, is the Ann Belovich garden. Ann Belovich was, or is, a amazing person. Let's see. On May the 3rd, on that 2010, 2012, we dedicated this garden. Ann Belovich is pictured there, is a lady who lives in Washington State. She's an absolutely amazing person. She has a huge collection of roses that she has developed or assembled over a very amazingly short period of time of the rambling roses, once blooming, large rambling roses. The climbing roses of the original climbing roses. There were no re-blooming climbers back in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And then her collection is basically these amazing roses. She's quite an interesting person. She taught herself navigation, and actually her and a friend sailed a boat from New Zealand to Hawaii after reading a book on navigation and learning how to navigate by the stars. She read some books on construction, got her contractor's license, built her own home, she and her husband with their own hands. The only thing they had contracted out was putting the roof on it. A 5,000 square foot home up in the mountains outside of Seattle, Washington. She read a book on roses, went to an event in El Cerrito, California, called A Celebration of Roses that was put on by the Heritage Rose Group in California. Became infatuated with roses, bought some books, and some 10 years later, she's got the largest collection in the world of these once blooming rambling roses. Anne is now 90-something years old. She goes to Germany every year to a garden called Sangerhausen in Germany, where many of these old roses are still, it's the only place they still are in existence pretty much in the world. Many roses, that's the only place they exist in the world. And we have many roses from there. We have one of very few that are in the United States in our collection. Anyway, she was getting elderly, and she realized that she was very concerned about what was going to happen to her collection of roses when she passed, because she only has one son. He has absolutely no interest in roses, and she has some land that is very valuable to be developed for residential real estate in the beautiful mountains up there in Washington State. So she knew her rose garden was doomed when she passed. She was looking for somebody to replicate her collection, and that's what we eventually ended up doing, was trying to replicate her collection as best we can. So what is a rambling rose? Rambling rose is, I was talking with Frank last night about this. There is no real clear-cut definition of what it is. It's kind of like a classification of roses. A class of roses is not some real magical, absolute, quantitative value that you can put on. Rambling roses, so I choose the definition of Graham Stuart Thomas, who was a famous rosarian in England. That he was the guy that really started the Heritage Rose movement, because he got very interested in these old roses. He wrote books on these roses, and that's what kind of stimulated interest around the world in recovering these old roses before they all went extinct. And he believed that rambling roses tend to be more related to species roses, in that they only bloom once, typically. They have a growth habit. Typically, ramblers have a growth habit of putting up many basal canes, many new canes coming up from the base of the rose. And these canes tend to be very limber and flexible, and typically very thin, as opposed to the climbing roses, which tend to have much heavier canes, much stiffer canes, and fewer of them. Not so much new basal growth coming up, but only a few canes coming up. And that's probably about as close as you can get. There are rambling roses that do reblooms, there are climbing roses that only bloom once, and you can complicate that with a large flowered climber that we'll talk about in a little while, that can also get involved in the conversation. Ramblers can get very large. They can get extremely large. This is Paul's Himalayan musk. If you can see the white roses up in these trees. This is not filling one tree, it's filling 3 trees. This is one plant coming up down here. And it's filling those 3 trees. And if there's another tree next to it, it will eventually go over. And that rose has probably been there 75, 80 years, I guess. This is a Tidcote garden in England. So these things can get humongous. Not all of them will grow to that extreme, but there are many of them that do. This is the bloom on Paul's Himalayan musk. It's a very light blush pink, very pale pink, but the spectacular aspect of it is the large clusters, and there's so many blooms that it will just cover itself up with bloom when it That's, we talked a little about the difference of the climbing rose and the climbing roses and rambling roses, and that's basically what I said before. The great majority of ramblers are hybrid of Rosa multiflora or Ruscheriana roses, except for one rose called Turner's Crimson China. Turner's Crimson Rambler. This is a rose that was actually found in England. Found in China. It was brought to England, and genetic studies have proved that it is a cross between Ruscheriana multiflora and Rosa chinensis, all at the same time. And that rose has been used in hybridizing quite a bit, particularly Michael Welsh used that rose. We built the rose garden in 2013. That was when we started tilling the land, put in some of the beds. There's another picture of the soil prep and the bed preparation when we were building the garden. And this is what we're doing out here today. This is boring the holes for the foundations for the steel towers that we grow these roses on to get them up in the air and let them do their thing, where they do the magnificent thing of breaking down. And this is, we're putting 6 of these towers in the entranceway of the garden up here right now. John was up there this morning doing exactly this, boring these holes. We then put, with a steel frame, we locate steel tubing in those holes. We concrete that steel tubing in, and when we leave this evening, that's what we'll have up here. We'll be up here in 2 weeks to drop the prefabricated steel towers down in those tubes, weld it, and plant some roses in there. This is what it will look like when the steel tower is made out of 5/8" rebar is dropped into it. This is a bed that is prepared at the foundation, ready for the towers to go up. In the summer of 2012, Anne began sending cuttings of roses. She took cuttings of her roses in Washington State. She sent them down to a good friend of ours, Malcolm Manners, at Florida State University, Florida College, Southern Florida College. And he rooted the cuttings for us. He's a professor of citrus down there, but he had a tremendous interest in the roses. He was one of the first ones that started replicating those Bermuda roses. And so he roots the cuttings out. He sends them to me in little 4-inch rooted cuttings. And then I typically grow them over winter in a cold frame at my house. And then the next year, when it warms up in spring, we move them up to Chambersville. This is growing them out in pots up there. The first group of roses that we got from her. And we've received roses for 3 or 4 years now, additional roses every year. This was the day we started planting, December 19, 2013. It's Greg Martin, the supervisor of roses up at Chambersville. Then on May 3rd, 2014, we dedicated the Ann Belovich garden. The photo there, that's Ann in the center. The guy with the red baseball cap is Stephen Scaniello. He's the president of the Heritage Rose Foundation. He's the gentleman that has done a lot of the work on the Heritage Rose Garden out here, down in the corner of the garden where the old garden roses are. Stephen has been kind of heading up a project of taking care of those roses for a number of years now. That's Dean Oswald, and that's his wife Carol. They own the property up there. Of course, that's Pam and myself, my wife Pam and myself. And that was at the dedication in May 3rd, 2014. One of the earliest ramblers we've got in our collection is from 1843, and this is a rose developed by hybridizing a feast. This is Baltimore Belle. It's one of the more popular ramblers in the country today. This is one of the early first rambling roses. Rambling roses were crosses of the species roses with some other kind of rose. And we got that once blooming, first generation genetically crossed. We get the climbing characteristics of some of these species roses, and we get more significant looking blooms than a species rose, which is typically a little 5-petal, kind of nothing looking rose. So by crossing the two, they started getting nice looking blooms, better looking blooms on the same big growth habit. It's interesting to note that that rose is a hybrid Sativa, the rose that we've got growing on our property in Chambersville, naturally. Some of the earliest crosses are actually were done in the United States, and they used Rosa sativa in those crosses. Rosa sativa also is very unique because it is the only rose in the whole genus Rosa that has male and female plants. Every other rose is bisexual. It has both sexes. Rosa sativa is the only rose that there are male plants or female plants. That's really unique. That uniqueness in the genetic characteristics is one of the reasons that Dr. Burns suspected it was different from other roses that might be anyway, this is Queen of the Prairie. This is the second oldest, as far as year of introduction rose that we've got in our collection. The Angelus collection contains one of the world's largest collection. If not there's no accurate figure that I can find on who's got how many in their collection, but we know we've got over 300 on these 12-foot towers. This is a list of the different hybridizers of roses. We're going to talk about a few of these because these are kind of interesting gentlemen, and they've got interesting stories about these roses and how they came about. But you can see Walsh of the United States. You can see the top, in the top 6 names there's 3 of them are United States hybridizers. And these are the number of varieties. This is the number of varieties we have in our garden from those particular different hybridizers. This list is not current. We've got the new roses in since we just got 60 new roses in from France last year that Ann got from Sangerhausen Garden. I mentioned in Germany. It took us 5 years from the time she had cuttings taken over there till we got the roses in our garden. It took 5 years to get the roses rooted over there, to come in here, to go through quarantine, and for us to get them in the garden. We've got 60 new varieties. Most of them have never been in the United States before. This is Rudolf Geschwin from Austria-Hungary. It's now called the Czech Republic. He went to a technical university in Prague. He started working as a forester. Many of these guys were foresters. That's basically what horticultural was back in those days, was forestry. And so many of these early hybridizers, that was their actual title. It was something, professor of forestry. But his hobby was breeding roses, and he created really some really, really beautiful roses. One very notable thing was that he was one of the first individuals that started laying down the principles of hybridization, kind of the principles of how genetics worked, and the phenomenon that occurred, and trying to arrange it in some sort of a scientific fashion. He also really grew some beautiful roses. One thing that's kind of unusual about his tend to be smaller than many of the other. They don't get quite as tall or as big. So if you're looking for a rambler to grow in a more confined space at a home or something, the Geschwin roses are good ones to consider because they typically will not eat your house like some of these other roses can do. This is Futacher Schilling Rose, a big, beautiful magenta pink bloom. Geisha, 1913. This period from 1900 to about 1920 is really probably the peak of the popularity of the rambling roses. It actually starts back in around 1870 or so, the big interest in it. It kind of peters out around 1930, 35, when there was more interest in reblooming roses. The hybrid teas were becoming more and more established, and more people were growing hybrid teas. So that was kind of but this 1913, you're going to see a lot of roses kind of in that time frame, because that's kind of the sweet spot in when these roses were extremely popular. Now remember, if you had a beautiful home back in that time frame, early 1900s, and you had climbing roses, you had ramblers, because there weren't any other roses until Dr. Van Fleet exported into what we call New Dawn now. That was the first reblooming rose. Incidentally, that event was so significant when it sported and New Dawn came about, and New Dawn rebloomed, that they thought that this was worthy of trying to patent. And they applied for a patent and were granted the first plant in the United States. New Dawn is plant patent number 1. The little trivia there that never goes up. This is some of his roses. That's Virago, another one, a big pink bloom. Most people have the impression that these rambling roses have just tons of little bitty flowers on them. And that is true for many of them. And it can be spectacular when you got, 100,000 little bitty blooms all blooming at the same time. It can be pretty spectacular. But there are also many of them that have big, beautiful, fragrant blooms. This is a rose, Norland rose. He used the same cross and he bred at different times. In 1884, he produced that rose on the top there. And then in 1910, later, he produced it. You can kind of see the improvements in his hybridizing techniques. It's how much more sophisticated this flower is than this flower. You can see a difference. You can see the progress that these guys were making in learning about the genetics and learning about the crosses and what worked better to get more beautiful blooms. The same process that continues through today. This was probably, he wasn't significant in the number of roses that he hybridized, but he was significant in a lot of the things that he did. This is Jackson T. Dawson. I had the opportunity this spring at the Heritage Rose Conference to hear a historian do a in-depth report on Dawson's life and everything. And he filled a 45-minute program with the details of this guy's life, which was absolutely phenomenal. But he was one of the first to use Rosa multiflora in the hybridizing process. Rosa multiflora is a rose that is kind of a scourge, because that's really where the rose rosette started, was in Rosa multiflora. It's a rose from China. It produces billions of seeds, and it can also spread by root sucker. It was not too wisely decided upon as a great plant to plant up in the Midwest for soil erosion, for wind barriers, for highway crash barriers, and during the Depression with the public works programs, they planted these things all over the place. It is now considered a noxious weed up in that part of the country. The rose rosette disease actually got started in that. It's a perfect habitat for the mite that spreads rose rosette disease. So it's kind of a curse, and that's probably where the rose rosette really got started in the wild. But it's also a great parent plant for many of these ramblers that we have. He was the first to use multiflora and also Rosa buscheriana in the Rambler breeding program. And those, as I mentioned before, are two of the most used species roses in hybridizing these roses. This is Dawson. Actually, this rose is probably not the the real Dawson. It's the one that's sold. The AIC means as in commerce, but it's probably not the true Dawson. I had an opportunity to go on a rose tour in Italy a few years ago, and if you ever had a chance to do that, it was a marvelous trip. And at Dr. Finici's garden in Italy, he has one of the largest collections of roses in the world. He has what I think is the true Dawson, and it happened to be in bloom, and I got a photo of it. This is the Dawson at Dr. Finici's garden, and this is the rose we're calling Dawson. And you can see some fairly significant differences in the flowers, and in the foliage, and in the water. So I think the rose we got is not accurate. Unfortunately, we cannot find this rose. It's not in the United States that we know of, and it's extremely difficult to import roses from Italy. In fact, it's almost impossible. You have to send them to England, and they have to quarantine them for a while, and then send them on to the United States. Can be done, but it's a difficult process. This is some of his others. This is one of a beautiful rose he's got at William C. Egan, big, fragrant flower, and you see it on the tower there. These pictures are kind of old. Some of them are much bigger. Dr. Michael Henry Horvath, he moved to America from England. He lived up in Ohio. He was a gardener for some wealthy families up there. He worked in the Cleveland's Park Department. He actually became a trustee of the American Rose Society back in its infancy. It was created by J. Horace McFarland. He bred with Rosa Satidra, and he had his roses he used the Treasure Island character names for his roses. So we've got Captain Kidd, John Lafitte, Long John Silver, and such names of his roses. They are beautiful roses. This is Long John Silver, a beautiful big white. One of them I call the Great Whites. There's about 6 beautiful big white roses, and this is one of them that I just absolutely love. This is Captain Kidd, huge, big red bloom, really an outstanding rose. It's spectacular when it blooms. And this is Pink Romer, one of his roses. This is an extremely popular rose in England. You see this a lot in English rose gardens. Graham Stuart Thomas, that I referenced a while ago, actually in his books, in talking about the spring, he knew it was spring when he saw the pink romers blooming over the walls of the estates. And that was how he knew it was springtime, when he saw that rose blooming. This is Dr. Walter Van Fleet. In my opinion, he's the guy that I think really did the best job. He started out actually as a medical doctor. He had a passion for roses, and he eventually dropped his medical practice and went to work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture at the Glendale Station in Maryland. He created a number of great roses. He was one of the first that was kind of interested in what we would now call the easy care or the earth kind aspect. He was interested in easy to grow roses. He called them dooryard roses was his name. And that was his desire, was to breed roses that didn't require any care or maintenance. That you just plant and would give you a spectacular performance. Unfortunately, he died at a very early age, very sudden death. Fortunately, there were some people at the research station that continued his work. He had many unnamed seedlings that he had created. Many of those came into commerce actually after his death, were introduced by cohorts of his at the Glendale station. He was, in 1924, the American Rose Annual for the American Rose Society. Had the quotation in it, he was probably the greatest plant breeder America has yet known. have a real good friend in Virginia that is attempting to collect every Van Fleet rose that she can. And we've gotten some of the ramblers that we have in our collection now have come from her collection that she has shared with us. This is Mary Wallace with a tremendously popular rose back in its day, 1924. This is that sweet spot in the popularity of the climbers that of the ramblers that we were talking about. You will see I use the phrase rambler and climber kind of intermingled because there really is no strict definition. This is Glendale, named for the research station that he worked at. One of them that I consider one of those great whites that I talked about a while ago. Again, it's an immature plant. That plant there is only about maybe a year and a half old, or 2 years old. So you can see the kind of growth you get on these things. This is Alita Lovett. The picture doesn't really capture the beauty of this. It's got some gold in the center when it first opens. And it's just a striking rose with a beautiful, beautiful fragrance. This is Silver Moon, another one of the great whites that I talk about. A big, it's kind of semi-double, doesn't have too many petals, but look at those stamens. Look at those yellow stamens. They just absolutely knock you out. A very unusual rose. This is there are a lot of ramblers that are bred from very strange species roses that you're not familiar with. I would have never heard of this species rose. That's Rosa Humongous, which I have never heard of. This is a rose that he's hybridized from. It's called Dr. E.M. Mills. It gets this beautiful, real crepe, delicate-looking, large bloom that is just really spectacular. But look at the growth habit of that type. It has these stiff canes of growth. Really, actually, we lost this rose, the rose rosette, and I have now replanted it. I've replanted it down with the hybrid musk rose, and where it can grow as a big shrub, because it's obviously not going to lend itself to being trained up on a pillar. It's also extremely thorny, which makes it real fun to work on. Ann's favorite hybridizer, the one that really got her cranked on collecting these roses, is this fellow, Michael Walsh, who was from England, again, as many of them were. He started gardening at 12 years of age. He just became absolutely enamored with gardening and then into roses. He took up Horvath's interest in the Busheriana. He bred about 40 roses between 1899 and 1920. He lost a tremendous number of roses when the railroad that his building was next to decided they needed to get rid of an old engine house that they had. And back they were too environmentally concerned back in that day. So their method of getting rid of the building was just to burn it to the ground. And they burned it, but with all that oil and all that was in that building, it produced so many toxic fumes that it wiped out all of his seedlings in his nursery. He eventually won a lawsuit against the railroad, but he had lost years and years of his work in hybridizing. No telling how many roses he would have produced if they hadn't had that environmental disaster. He used that rose Turner's Crimson Rambler. Remember at the beginning I said there was this one rose from China that was brought in that was used as a breeding stock, and that he used that many, many times. And you'll see the resemblance in many of his roses to that. A lot of his roses have small flowers on them, but in extreme profusion. This is an excelsa. The roses we're planting out here, one of these is called Super Excelsa. It looks very much like this, except it reblooms. We're putting on these towers out here. This was one of his most popular roses we actually found this rose growing in a bar ditch about 3 miles from the farm in Chambersville, just growing in this ditch. I don't know how it got in this ditch, but we found this rose. We didn't know what it was. Eventually, when we got the correct named rose, it became obvious that the rose we had was exactly the same rose. And so we had found it. But it was an extremely popular rose in its time. And probably it was on some farmhouse there or something. And somehow or another, a cutting got down this ditch, or they may have been growing it on a fence that was in that area. And again, it had survived with no sign of a farmhouse there, no sign of the old fence, nothing, but here this rose was still growing. And it was growing out of almost pure limestone. There was no soil there. We called it the limestone rose. It was a study name again. This is Hiawatha. I should have put in a recent picture. I've got a picture of everything all the way up to the top of a 12-foot trellis and all the way back down to the ground in solid bloom. Magnificent. Some of those are susceptible to powdery mildew, some of these roses. This is Babette, a pretty rare rose that a lady was kind enough to share with us to add to the collection. It was not in Ann's original collection, but it is now. Minnehaha, to go along with Hiawatha, of course. It's a pink. Here you can see one that's a little bit larger. You can see that beautiful trailing habit on a windy day. You can see how the draped canes blow in the wind. Lafayama, you can see typically his have small flowers, but they have huge clusters of small flowers, which makes a very significant display on its own right. America, shorter growing, more bushy growth characteristic, a very pale pink, white center with a light pink. Beautiful, beautiful rose. Lady Gay, another one of his, a hybrid of Sheriana. Rene Barbier, perhaps some of the most beautiful of the ramblers. This is the French from Orleans, France. He used Sheriana. Well, he used a rose that was very similar to Sheriana, the Rosa Lucia. It's a rose that grows in Japan. And he crossed using very large flowered tea and hybrid tea roses. And he was really trying to create roses with big blooms, which he was successful at. Albertine is one of the more popular ramblers that you can buy in many nurseries today. It's a beautiful, big white bloom. Pretty thorny rose. Alexander Durall, 1909. Francois Picard, a beautiful, soft yellow, kind of a quartered bloom, kind of a Salma, Mademoiselle de la Malmaison bloom, but to it with a real quartered bloom, that soft yellow. Very, very nice rose. Ferdinand Roussel. This is just a shot of some of the towers in the garden there at Chambersville. Another shot of some of the towers in bloom. They all don't bloom at exactly the same time. It'd be spectacular if they did, but the advantage of them doing it this way is they are in bloom over about a 6-week or almost 2 months time period. So we got 2 months of the year, but we've got some significant percentage of the roses that are in bloom at the same time. Some of the other noteworthy ramblers is really beautiful is Monthly Rambler, which is a very, very popular rose. Beautiful red, Jules Lachère, Golden Ages. This is one of the smaller blooms, but will just absolutely cover up with white. It will be totally white at the right time of year. This is a rose that a lady gave us. She said it was Nicotian Dog Noisette. No, Blush Noisette. She said it was Blush Noisette. We planted it. It is certainly not Blush Noisette. It is a gorgeous white rambler. I mean, we cannot identify what it is. We don't know what it is. We don't know where she got it. But it is one of the most spectacular roses we've got, and we don't know what the name is. We've got that outside of the embellishments collection. That was one we had before we even knew embellishments. The Miss Helliette, big, soft, kind of a gray pink, soft pink. And some of the lavender-colored roses, Moselle with a beautiful mauve colored rose with great fragrance. Lambertiana, Thousand Bloomington, another one of the small ones. It's huge clusters of blooms. Plum American Beauty is absolutely one of the best roses that Rambler roses that it is. Big, gorgeous, fragrant blooms, almost hybrid tea looking blooms, and it has a very long bloom season. That thing will have blooms on it for at least 6 or maybe as long as 8 weeks. It will have some bloom on it in the spring. And it is not a real vicious grower. It will not grow extremely tall. So that's a great rose that you can use in the appropriate spot in a home garden. All over, we've got over 300 varieties of these, all on these 12-foot steel towers now. We hope you enjoy them. We hope you come by Chambersville. Did want to throw this picture in here of Peggy Martin. Many of y'all know Peggy Martin or know who she is. That is the so-called Katrina Rose, the lady that lost her home, her rose garden, and her parents in Katrina. She came back to her garden a month later when the water finally went down. She lived in Buckingham Parish. Her house was under 30 feet of water. She came back. Of course, everything was covered in mud. There was nothing of her 300 rose garden left, except this one rose was showing green and some little blooms popping out on it. And that became known as the Katrina Rose. Actually, Mike Shute picked it up. Some nurseries started reproducing it and selling it with $5 added to the price that went back to help restore the gardens in New Orleans from Katrina. And that is one of the best performing roses we've got in the garden. All the Ramblers we got, we have best performance of this, and we have not lost. I have not seen Rose Rosette from Peggy Martin Rose yet. I don't know if that means anything, but there are very few that we haven't seen Rose Rosette. I did put in some pictures of the roses we're going to put out here, just to kind of give you a little preview of what's going to be out here. These are very immature, small roses in our inventory, but I do have some pictures of the blooms. This is Super Excelsa. All of these roses were chosen to put out here because these do rebloom. They rebloom in flushes over the season, just like most of your other hybrid teas or anything else does. So we will have a beautiful Rambler out there that also will give you color all through the year, and not just that one huge blush in the spring or early summer. That's Super Excelsa, red. This rose is Super Fairy, with a soft white pink, and then this rose is Super Dorothy, very similar in appearance to Dorothy Perkins. It was actually hybridized from Dorothy Perkins, crossed with an unnamed seed. So those are the three. There'll be 2 of each of those on the columns out the front of it. And that pretty winds it up, unless y'all got some questions.